All right, hi everyone. So we are now recording. So thank you so much for joining us for workshop number 2 in the Mitacs workshop series with Student Union. So I'm Annie Huang. So I'm a Mitacs advisor, one of the Mitacs advisors for the University of Calgary, and I'm in the Calgary region. So I was a student here at U of C. So I did my bachelor's degree in chemistry and also my master's degree in physical chemistry here. All right. So we'll have a up to 1 hour session, including Q&A at the end. So if you can just hold off on your questions until the end. So just to get started, Okay, just to get started, if you want, you can participate and join in on the QR code. So you can scan the QR code, or you can go to slido.com, type in code number 1275501. The poll is now live. I just want to see who's here today. So if you can just type in what is your major. I'm just curious who is joining us today and from which department and which program. And then just as a note, you don't need to register for slido.com. It is free, and you don't need to make an account or anything. You can just go on the poll and then just write in an answer. So I'll just give you a few moments to write down an answer. All right, so I'm seeing some from software engineering. I'm seeing some people from electrical engineering, neuroscience, astrophysics. Okay, so we do open to all disciplines. So we're not just for STEM, we also open up to arts and social sciences and humanities. All right, so in case you're not familiar with Mitacs, or if you weren't here for the last workshop, so Mitacs is a national independent nonprofit in Canada. So our mandate is to promote research and innovation. And so what we do is that we connect organizations and industry partners to work with post-secondary institutions in order to work on projects that will solve big technical and societal challenges. I just want to give a quick shout out to our funding partners. So we are funded by the federal government and also the provincial governments. I also want to show my other teammates at the U of C from Mitacs. So I primarily work with science and engineering. I do occasionally help out with some medicine and vet med, and sometimes, once I helped out with one in education. My colleague Sarah Tops, she works more with medicine, arts, social sciences, humanities, and other related areas. And then my colleague Angelo, he works with he does a little bit of everything. He doesn't just do U of C, he also works with other schools in Southern Alberta. And we also have a fourth person in Calgary. She's not on the slide, so her name is Ami Wu. She works with the other schools in Calgary, like Mount Royal, State, and Bow Valley. So if you have other friends at those other schools, they're also eligible. They might also be eligible for Mitacs funding. So we all work together. So if you try to contact us, we all collaboratively work together. So even if you go to me and I'm not working with your faculty specifically, I can always direct you to one of my other colleagues. So if you were here last time, you probably saw this slide. So Mitacs Accelerate, I'm just going to go over it very quickly because today's workshop is more focused on how to find an industry partner. But for Mitacs Accelerate internships, there's 3 parties that you have to have in order to apply. So one is your industry partner. So typically that's a company. The other side is the academic side. So that's an academic supervisor. So that would be a professor at the university, and then an intern. So that would be a post-secondary student, or it could even be a postdoc. So it's post-secondary at all levels, from college, bachelor level, master's, PhD. I know some areas and some disciplines, they don't call it industry partner, they call it community partner. That's typically more common in social sciences and humanities. But the general term you'll see on our website is called partner organization. So we refer to this as the Mitacs triangle, meaning you have to have all 3 of these parts in order to do a Mitacs Accelerate internship. Shortest project is 16 weeks or 4 months, but you can do longer projects. So I'll show you in a moment how to build longer term projects. Okay, just in case you're wondering who's an eligible industry partner, I'll just go through this part quickly. So we work with for-profit companies. So it can be a large company. It can even be a small company. We do work with a lot of startups. We also work with a lot of nonprofits in Canada. Typically, this is more common for social sciences and humanities, but I have seen some researchers in STEM work with nonprofits as well. We also open up to municipalities. So City of Calgary is also eligible. And we also open up to hospitals in Canada. So if you are working with a hospital, please make sure to CC my colleague Sarah, because she has to check to make sure that your hospital project is eligible for this funding. If you're ever unsure if something is eligible or not, just shoot us an email and then we can just check for you. All right, so if you were here last time, you saw these building blocks. So all of our projects for Mitacs Accelerate and these internships are made up of building blocks. So each building block is between 4 to 6 months in length. Typically, it's usually 4 months. And then you have your intern, so a student, a prof, and an industry partner all work together on a project. Now, one of the key differences between our internship programs with other ones that are already exist is that for you as the student, you have to spend time with the industry partner and also with the university. So it sounds a little confusing, but basically you work on one project, but sometimes, for certain experiments or certain activities, you'll go to the company, and sometimes you'll be at the university doing other types of tasks. So typically 50-50 split, but if you need to spend more time at the university, you can do up to 75% at the university and 25% of the company, or you can even do it the other way around. But the intent and the spirit of our program is that by the end of the project, you will have industry experience in addition to working in a research group at the university. So in terms of funding, so this slide is trying to keep it fairly simple. I won't go into all the details of how the money is spent, but generally 50% will come from the industry partner and 50% comes from Mitacs. So Mitacs is covering half of the cost. And for each one of those building blocks or units, it's either $10,000 or $15,000 for each one. And so if it's $10,000, that means company pays half and Mitacs pays the other $5,000. If it's $15,000, companies pay $7,500, Mitacs pays $7,500. And so I made a note at the bottom, you can stack these units to form larger projects. So what that means is that sometimes projects are a lot bigger than just one student. You can actually stack multiple students on the same application if you're all working on one project. You can put them at the same time. You can have one start first, one comes in later. And then you can even do multi-year projects if it's a longer term project that the company and the professor wants to do. Now, the only limitation is that for each person that's on the project, they do have a maximum that they can do. So if you're an undergraduate student and you're working on your bachelor's degree, you get a maximum of 3 of these units or 3 of these blocks. Now you can decide to do them back to back. So maybe you want to put them together to make a 1-year project. You can also decide, if you need a break in between because you have courses, you could do them in different semesters or maybe different summers. So up to you what makes more sense, but you get a maximum of 3. Now, if any of you are going to grad school, you get more of these units. So if you go to your master's or you do your PhD, every time you move up a level, you get more and more of these units all the way to postdoc. All right, so in terms of the process, you have to have that triangle. So you need an intern, academic supervisor or prof, and an industry partner. Now you'll notice where it says intern, it says TBD. That's just for cases where you have multiple students, but maybe someone hasn't been identified. Maybe the prof says, well, we need 2 students, but I don't know who the second one is. And so what the prof does is usually they'll just recruit someone later to the project. But the other 2 for the prof and the industry partner, they have to be identified at the time of application. So application package is online. I recommend that if you have all 3 pieces, make sure you send me an email so I can help with you. I'll give you a checklist specific for your case. And then when you have a first draft ready, you can send it to me. I'll check it over, make sure everything looks okay. I'll give you some feedback just to help improve your application. And then if everything's ready to go, we'll send it peer review. So review process normally takes about 8 weeks. If it's just one student. If you have multiple students, or if it's a longer term project, like maybe it's a very large project with multiple students, multiple years, those ones probably will take longer just because reviewers need more time to read it. Sometimes you might get a revision request. So if reviewers say they don't understand a certain part of your application, or they have some questions that you need to clarify, it might take a bit longer. Now, if you are trying to go for a May 2023 start, I do recommend trying to apply earlier than the 8 weeks, just because we tend to see a huge surge of applications in February to March. So ideally, if you can get it in by late January, then at least you'll be ahead of everyone else. And then projects you can start once it's approved, you can either start right away or you can start within the next 12 months. Some people, depending on how early they start, sometimes there's just certain paperwork they need to get through. And so some people might not start right away, especially if the company hasn't sent their half of the money yet. Just keep in mind, it does take some time for the university to process all the money. So just keep that in mind as well when you're trying to submit things and trying to prepare for a May start date. I just want to quickly mention, so you can apply technically any time of the year. Just keep in mind that if you have, let's say, a May start date, you just want to make sure you apply early enough. And then for success rates, in case you're wondering, so it is a 95% success rate. So you have a pretty good shot of getting it, assuming that you're eligible and that your application can pass peer review. All right. So that's kind of just the overview of what I talked about last time. There will be a video recording that'll be uploaded to the website and then to the registration website. So you can always review the first video in case you missed it last time. So part 2, this is what we're here for. We're going to talk about, how do you find an industry partner? How do you talk to them? Because a lot of times I find students, they're really interested. They want to apply for this money. They're willing to do the work to find a prof, but they don't know how to find an industry partner. And a lot of times we're not really taught how to do that properly. So today's the goal is to just give you some strategies and some tools of what you can do to find some industry partners. And also, what do you say when you actually do find them? Okay, so I'll talk about some outreach and some networking tips. Right, so most of the time when we think of industry partners in our field, we typically think of really large companies, really large organizations. I did this workshop yesterday with grad students, and I asked them for the ones that they think of right away, how many of them are big companies? And most of the ones that they listed were all the really large companies and organizations. But actually at Mitacs, most of the ones that we work with are actually the smaller companies, the smaller organizations that have less than 500 people. And we do work with a lot of startups. I even work with a lot of companies that have less than 50 people, right? And so, yes, we do work with large companies, but the vast majority or over 80% is actually what we call small, medium enterprises or SMEs. And then I did want to also just highlight that about 30% of our host companies end up hiring the intern after the end of the project. So some of them, if you're really good and you really stand out and the company really likes you, they might even offer you a full-time job after you graduate. Now that's 30%. What about the other 70? So even though the other 70 didn't get rehired, maybe the company is just not able to hire them on full-time. That's okay, because at least now on your resume, you have industry experience. You're more likely, you kind of stand out a lot more just because you have that internship experience. So it makes it a little bit easier to show other types of experiences on your resume when you're applying for jobs. All right, so I'll open the second QR code. So without this workshop, let's say you didn't attend today's workshop, I'm just kind of curious, how would you normally find opportunities? What would you do to find companies, find organizations for an internship? So I've opened up the QR code again. It is live now. So if you just want to type in some ideas of what could you do normally? So if you didn't go to today's workshop, what would you normally do? If you were told, go find an internship, go find a company or an organization. So I'll just give you a few moments to just list some ideas. Feel free to write as much as you want if you have multiple ideas. All right, so I'm seeing some answers coming in. So some people said Google, some people said Elevate, some people said job websites, Indeed, networking app like LinkedIn. Yeah, that's a really good one. So a lot of online tools. Anything else other than online tools? Some people said cold email, looking for companies that they're interested in. Okay, yeah, so those are good ideas. So I will show you some other tools and other potential resources that you can also access. Okay, so first up, usually what you do is you kind of, you do data collection, right? So you're collecting the data, you're collecting information, putting it together, trying to see, okay, how do I start, right? Because a lot of students, they think, well, where do I get started? Where do I start looking? So a lot of people said looking online. So this is one example. Obviously, there's going to be lots of resources, but one example you could do is go on the Calgary Economic Development website. You can go under one of the sections that says research, and under research, there's a bunch of company lists. So you should be able to search up certain companies under different sectors. There's also best employer lists, different industry lists that you can look up through different years. So that's one way. That gives you a lot of lists of different companies. So that's potentially one way, right? This is one, it's almost like a database. And then speaking of databases, I also have students that ask, okay, Annie, do you know if this company or this organization has worked with Mitacs before? And then normally what I do is say, how about you have a look at our public database? So this is on our website. You can go to our projects page on the Mitacs website. And basically it's a public database, so anybody can access this. And basically you can look up all the old projects. So these are not current projects that are open. These are past projects that have been done and funded through this program. And you can look up different companies, different projects that are in your area. So one thing you could do is to go on the filters, and you can go on keywords and type something that's related to your area of interest. So when I was an undergrad, I used to do research on nanoparticles and nanotechnology. So I could type in nanotechnology into keywords and see what projects come up. And in those projects, it actually shows what university worked with them, which student, which prof, which company or which organization was on that project. And it even gives you kind of a general description of what the project was about. You can even look up certain companies. If you're thinking, man, did company X do a Mitacs project? You can also click here on partner, and it gives you a full list, and you can just search from that. A lot of times why people like this is just because when they're searching for examples of projects, they find a lot of new companies and new organizations that they probably had never heard of, because they're probably very small and not as well known as the bigger names. So that's another way you can search for it. So I will make a note here. So these databases are just starting points. They're not exhaustive lists. So what that means is that there's lots of companies and lots of organizations that haven't worked with Mitacs yet, or maybe they're just developing a project right now and they're just not on the database. So I don't want anyone coming out of the workshop thinking that this is the only list of companies or organizations that you can work with. There's lots of other ones that have yet to do Mitacs projects, and lots that can be added. I've met some companies where they said they never knew about Mitacs before until a student actually came up to them and told them about this opportunity. So some companies actually learn about us through students. So that's another way that companies learn about us as well. Here's another one. It's called SciVal. So I recently learned about this one. So this one is not public. This one, you do have to have access. So luckily for you guys, because you're students at U of C and you have access to university library resources, U of C does pay for SciVal, and you have access to this database when you're a student. So basically, it's a database of different publications that have different collaborations between universities, but also universities with industry, so with companies. And you can also filter it out based on sector. Again, there's probably a lot of companies that are not on there because either they haven't published the paper yet, or because they're still, or maybe they're just starting their collaboration now. So again, a lot of companies you won't see on there because they haven't been added to the database. Why people use this one is because for companies that are on these lists, you know that they do research, you know that they've worked with universities before, and you know that they also publish papers. So for professors, when they ask, well, is the company okay with publications and putting it in a thesis or in a paper to send to a journal, this is another way to say, oh, this company has published before, so they're probably more open to publications. All right, I know this is another one. So a lot of people also talked about job websites or LinkedIn. So yeah, that's another thing you can look up, is that some companies, they're already posting it online and they're looking for people right now, right? So some people, they will just apply online and then go through the normal process. Some people might write it in their cover letter that they'll talk about Mitacs funding and how they can help cover part of the cost if they're eligible. Sometimes people cold email. Sometimes people message people on LinkedIn. I will say that cold email and just cold messaging, it's a bit of a hit or miss, because sometimes you get lucky and other times they just don't reply back. So it is another way of finding potential opportunities, because if the company has job postings, it does mean that there's some kind of need in that company or in that organization, and also shows that they have money. So they have money to pay for someone to do that position. Other things you may not be as familiar with is some companies that do scientific research, they might qualify for tax credits from the government. So that's just another thing you can point out, is that in case some companies that say, oh, this seems like even with my tax covering half, I still have to pay quite a lot. You can also point out that they might qualify for certain tax credits because they do research projects. All right, so other things wasn't really as mentioned that much in the poll, but other ways to find industry partners, and maybe it's not as obvious because these ones are not online. These ones you actually have to talk to people. So this is what we mean by networking. So you can always start with people you know, right? You can talk to your friends, your family, maybe your TAs, classmates, maybe you're in a research group already, and there's grad students that you can ask, because that's actually how some people find them. I had yesterday when I did this workshop, somebody said alumni, so people who've already graduated, people who already work at different organizations and companies, especially people who are in your program. You can also, sometimes you can reach out to them and they might also be looking for someone. Other ways are talking to, talking to professors when you're looking for summer research, or when you're looking to do your honors thesis. Usually you have a committee. So there are a lot of professors that do work with companies and industry partners already. So sometimes they are looking to recruit some students for their projects that have already been pre-approved. Other things are career events. So like career fairs, there's usually companies that are looking to recruit people to recruit students. There's usually things like career panels, maybe for specific sectors. There's even things like alumni panels. So sometimes they do like round robin events where you can ask questions directly to the person, and then they can just talk to you about their job, about their company, and what they do. Other things are going to events. Nowadays, where it looks like things are shifting back to in-person, some are still hybrid. Maybe there's some that are still virtual. It is a lot easier to do networking in person. When I started this job, I had to do everything virtually, and it was a lot harder just for that engagement piece. But there's usually networking events. There's usually conferences that have industry that attend. There might be some on campus. Sometimes there are student groups that host networking events with industry, and they invite some companies to come in. A lot of them tend to be more downtown. And then you guys have a bus pass, you have the U-Pass, you can always just, if you have time, you can also go to downtown for some networking events too. One good way of finding them is through Eventbrite. So there's usually a lot of events that are going on in Calgary. So that's another way to just find out about different events that are going on. So speaking of events, I did want to just point out a couple of upcoming events in Calgary. So one big one that's coming up in November, from November 21st to 27th, is called Innovation Week. It's in downtown. So there's lots of different panels, there are different events, workshops, pitch competitions, different meetups. So there's going to be a lot of different companies that will be there. So that's another way to just meet with different companies around the city. Platform Calgary is also downtown. So it's across the street from the Central Library. And they usually have lots of different events as well. So one of them is called Tech Talent Tuesday. So every other Tuesday, there's like a networking event from 4 to 5. And then again, that's another way you can meet with companies. So if it's in person, that means there is a limited capacity in terms of space. So I do advise that if you can, register in advance, just because if it's a really popular event, then tickets can run out very quickly. Typically, a lot of events tend to be free, which is good for you because then you don't have to pay extra. But if it's not free, try to see if there's any kind of student discounts. That's one of the things I miss about being a student, is that when you're a student, you qualify for all these discounts, and even for events and conferences, typically there is some kind of student discount that can make the price a lot cheaper for you to attend. Now, if you are going in person, make sure to dress nice. I know from COVID, being online, going to class online, it's easy to just wear your pajama bottoms and dress comfortably. But for these types of events, because you are meeting with companies and potential industry partners, it is a good idea to just dress nice. Some people, they like to bring business cards. You don't have to, that's optional for you as a student. But if you'd like to, you can do it through Vistaprint. You could do it through Staples. I think U of C has a print shop that they have like the actual template, like the official template that U of C uses. I think it costs a little bit more, but that's another option for you. But more importantly, when you go to events, it's more important that you get the company's business card and the person you're talking to, because you can hand out all the business cards you want, but if no one's getting back to you, it's not as effective. Versus if you make sure to get their business card, you have a chance to follow up with them, and you can be more proactive in trying to set up, subsequent meetings to try to see if they'd be interested to do an internship project with you. All right, I just put this slide. So a lot of it through networking, a lot of it is through relationship building. Like I said, you can start with people you know first. That's what I used to do as a student, is I talked to people I already knew, and I would ask them if they could introduce me to someone, to one of their friends that I haven't met yet, of someone who is in a certain field. So one of the things I did is I actually asked one of my old TAs who had a job, and I said, hey, I'm looking for a position in this particular area. Do you know anyone? And they say, oh, you know what, Annie, you should talk to my friend. And they would send me to their friend, and then I would talk to them. And then if it was, wasn't a good fit, I'd say, oh, do you know anyone else? And they say, oh, you should talk to my other friend. And then I kept doing that. And at some point, everyone just started introducing me to each other. And sometimes you run into the same people on the list because they run in the same circle. But a lot of it is, that's how I did it. So it's a little bit, I did it through warm introductions. It is a lot easier if you have someone to vouch for you or a friend to say like, hey, this is my friend Annie, and she's looking for an internship, or she's looking to do a research project in this area. Would you have some time to chat with her? And most times the other person would say yes, just because it was their friend doing the request, versus if I just sent a cold email to that other friend, it's less likely they would write back to me because they didn't know who I was. I didn't have that warm introduction. So one way is, you can go on LinkedIn, right? I wouldn't just try to add everyone randomly. So start with people you know, and then when you go to events, you can add people on LinkedIn. People are usually pretty nice that they'll accept the request after you've met with them. If you are adding people, try to write some kind of message so that they know how you've met, because sometimes when people get so many LinkedIn requests, they're not sure who you are. They might not remember you. But a lot of this from relationship building, sometimes it's just, over time, if you see the same people at events, sometimes you just become friends with them, even if they're not in your field. And then when you're meeting with people at events, you can ask them different questions. You can ask them about their job, about their company, what kind of projects they're up to, what do they like about the event? Maybe if there was a pitch competition, what was their favorite pitch? If there was a conference and lots of presentations, you can ask them what was their favorite presentation. You can even ask them, other types of questions. You could ask them if there's a lot of food at the event. Sometimes you could ask them, which one was your favorite dessert and why? And sometimes people just bond over food, right? So it doesn't have to all be work. It can also just be, more personal, more fun kind of informal questions as well. Right, so that was the first part of just kind of different resources, different tools, how do you find the people in the first place? But eventually when you have a conversation, once you go past the, kind of more informal types of questions or more about their job, eventually they will ask you kind of what you do, right? And if you're trying to sell yourself and try to show that you have skills to do an internship or to do a research project, it helps to know what do you say exactly. So when you're talking to people, ultimately you're telling a good story, right? You don't want to bore them with too many details. A lot of people call this the elevator pitch. So some people will say you need 30 seconds to describe who you are and what you do. There's also different lengths that you could do it. Sometimes you don't even have 30 seconds. Sometimes you have one sentence especially if there's like a small group and everyone's just trying to introduce themselves. Sometimes you only have one sentence to just introduce who you are and what you're doing. Okay, so this slide is about what's your value to industry. I will talk about the word value a little bit. So for industry, when they have interns or when they have internships, the biggest thing is, does this internship project bring value to my company or to my organization, right? So I've met companies before that say, I don't want to have an intern for the sake of having an internship, because if this doesn't bring value to my company, I don't want to do it, right? I don't want to put the time and resources to train them, to put money into it if it doesn't have any value to my company. I've also seen some that have tried internship programs and they say, I had an intern one time, they wrote a really nice report by the end, but I didn't feel like that report had any real value to my company, and I don't want to do this again. And so it was harder to get them to try again, because maybe it just was that one project that wasn't a good fit. But when they don't see value in it, or when they feel like it's not very good value, then they don't want to have to try it again. So that's not a case that you want to have. So value is a very big thing for industry, and that's something that they want to make sure that if you're doing a project with them, it has to be valuable to them, it has to help them. So when you're describing what do you do, because after you ask them questions, they talk about, hey, this is what I do, this is my company, this is what we're up to. They're going to ask you the same question. They're going to say, hi, hi, Annie, what do you do? And then a lot of times for students, especially grad students, but even sometimes undergrads, you start to go into, you say like, I'm studying chemistry. And sometimes if they have done research or a lot of coursework or labs before, they start describing everything they've ever done. They start describing all their course numbers. They start describing all their research. And they tend to use a lot of jargon that the other person might not understand anything, right? So when I was doing this as a grad student, people would ask me, oh, what's your research about? Because I would say, I'm doing my master's and I'm doing a research project. I actually made the mistake one time and I said a lot of jargon. I said, yeah, so I'm synthesizing and characterizing ruthenium platinum core shell nanoparticles, and I'm looking at the mechanism for ethanol oxidation. And that other person just looked at me and had no idea what I was saying. So then I had to flip it on the fly and say, okay, in other words, I'm working on lower cost materials that can be used in eco-friendly cars. And all of a sudden, her expression changed. She started being interested. She's like, wow, that's so cool. And you say you make nanoparticles? What is that? Can you tell me more? How do you make nanoparticles? How do you test them? And all of a sudden, we started having a conversation because it was something she could relate to. So ultimately, remember, you're telling a story, something that they can, that's like a hook, that's like an anchor that they can use to remember. Now remember, like I said, make sure you explain how you can help them. If it's something that is related to you, then you did target someone directly for a project, make sure that you understand how you and your research, what your skills can do to help them, because it's not about you as a student, it's about how do you help industry solve the problem that they're facing. Okay, so this one, you can use it. This is kind of an example of what else you say after you do your introduction. You can also use this for an email as well, or a LinkedIn message. So you can say, so if you have experience with research and you have a professor already, this works a lot better. And you can say, our research group has extensive expertise in fill in the blank and would like to develop a mutually beneficial collaboration with this company X to help create new solutions, or you can say solve some challenges associated with problem X. So we are already in discussion with our funding partners, you can say Mitacs, who are committed to sharing the cost of a potential R&D project. If this is of interest, would you be available for a meeting to explore the opportunities with our partners? Who else should be part of this conversation on your end? So again, this works well if you have a prof already, if you have experience already. So basically what you're trying to showcase is that you have expertise, you have the right skills to help them solve some kind of problem that they're working on. And you're also calling it a mutually beneficial collaboration, meaning that they're going to get something out of it. The other part, so that part is valuable for companies. The other part that's valuable is things like money. So remember, because Mitacs covers 50%, if they see that the company doesn't have to pay the full amount, that's also valuable to them because they can save money. Now, you always want to end it off on some kind of question, because if you end off your email or your message on a question, then the other person feels like they have to actually respond and have an action item for them. So they actually feel like they have to write back to you. So you're trying to set up a meeting with them, but you're also asking who should be the right person. I've went to conferences and events before where, you meet with someone, you exchange business cards, and then when I send the email, they say, you know what, Annie, I'm actually not the best person to talk to about an R&D project. You should talk to my other colleague. You should talk to them, and they would be the right person to help with you. So this part is also just so you make sure you're talking to the right person, because maybe the right person that is doing the research project, they weren't at the event, but one of their other colleagues were. Now, I do recognize not everyone has a prof right now. Not everyone has research experience. Maybe you're just starting out. So I have another template that you can also use if you're in this other situation. So if you don't have a lot of experience yet, and you're trying to gain experience, you're trying to still find a prof, you can always change the wording a bit. So you can say things like, I'm writing to explore a potential opportunity with you. Your company or your organization is a exciting or interesting or leader in, and then fill in the blanks. So you're going to have to do some homework. You're going to have to read their website, see some news articles, just learn a little bit about them, just to show that you have done your homework. I'd love to learn about all these interesting projects that you are working on, particularly, again, fill in the blanks, right? Again, these are things on their website, things that are in news stories, things that they might have explained in a pitch competition. So you're gonna have to do that homework to fill in the blanks. I've been researching topic X, or learning certain skills. So write what skills it is. And I would love to have the chance to apply what I've learned. And then you can add in, I recently qualified for a funding program that supports research collaboration projects by covering up to half of the cost of the student stipend. So again, it's similar to what I wrote last time, but this is written in case you don't have a prof yet, or in case you're a little bit earlier in your program and you don't have much research experience, but you're trying to show that you're really curious, you're really keen on learning, you want to apply your skills, and you do want to help the company work on some kind of project. Now, like I said last time, you always end it with a question, and you could say, would you be open to a meeting with me and the funder? And again, if there's a question, they're more likely gonna write back to you. Okay, so explaining the funding. When you're at networking events, what's the best thing to do is actually to keep it simple. I know, I talked about all those internship units and those building blocks and how you can have more than one and different funding models. Okay, when you're at networking events and you're talking to someone, you don't explain all those details. You want to keep it simple, keep it short. You just have to say industry covers half, company covers half, Mitacs will cover the other 50%. And that's it. You want to keep it simple for them, because when you're at an event, it's not like a meeting where they can take notes. You're just trying to gauge if they have interest, if they would like to move forward to next steps. Right? So you just want to keep it simple for them. So you don't want to give all the details yet. When you have a potential partner and you're ready to set something up, you can always send them to me. We can have a meeting together and I can go through the details, because I don't expect any student to know every single detail, every single nuance. Even after watching these workshops, typically there are some specific cases or specific questions they might have that you might not know the answer to, but I can help you explain that side. So we're kind of like a tag team. You explain your skills, your research, and I explain kind of the money side of things. Okay, so don't forget to ask for their contact info. Like I said, make sure you get their business card, because then when you have something, you can more proactively do the next step. So I just want to do a quick question. What is the most important next step? So let's say you go to a networking event and you have their business card. What should you do after? Yep, follow up, correct. Yeah, so make sure you follow up, because if you collect business cards and you don't follow up with them, then it doesn't really mean anything. Even if you pass out your business cards, a lot of people might not write back. When you are following up, it is, again, a bit of hit and miss, but if you have their business card, you have something to talk about in your follow-up email, then you have a better shot of getting a response rather than if you just did a cold email. So in case you're wondering, here's another email template when you're following up. You don't have to follow up on the day of the event. You can follow up the day after. Even 1 or 2 days after is still okay, just because it's still fresh in their mind. So you can say hi and then insert their name. Make sure you double check their name. People don't like it if you spell their name wrong. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me at name of event on date of the event. I really appreciated learning more about, and then talk about something that you learned from them. So maybe their research project, their company. What you want to do is just jog their memory about the conversation that you had. And then you say, as I mentioned, I'm already in discussion with federal and provincial funding partners. So you can say Mitacs, who are committed to supporting up to half of the cost of a potential R&D project. And then if you are open to discussing this further, can you please provide some times that you're available to meet with me and or the funder? So in this case, you're trying to make things convenient for the other person, right? Just because people in industry, they're really busy. They have limited time to do these meetings. So you're trying to make things convenient. You're trying to be more flexible for their schedule. And then just make sure to sign off with your name. So remember, when you're writing to people, whether it's, if you try to go for cold emails, bit of hit and miss, or if you're trying to do follow-up emails after an event, make sure you're not writing too much, because if it's too long, people don't want to read it, right? People in industry, they get lots of different emails. So if it's too long, they just might ignore it or skip over you. When you are talking to people at events, make sure you are listening to what they're trying to do. Ask good questions. People like students when they're curious and ask good questions. They remember that, and then you can respond accordingly, right? And then remember, sometimes it's not a good fit, and you don't have to talk about internship if it's not a good fit. You can just talk to them, learn more about their organization, more about their sector. Maybe you'll become friends with them. Who knows? And then be friendly, right? You don't have to be overly formal. You don't have to script everything. Do practice what you're trying to say, but you don't have to sound like a robot, right? So people are friendly, generally speaking, and people do like students because they see that students, they're very keen on learning. So like I said before, once you have a prospective partner and they say, hey, I'm actually pretty interested in learning more about Mitacs. How does it work? I have some questions. You can say, oh, you can actually CC me on the email and your reply, and then we could set up a meeting. And then again, I can help explain the funding piece and the application process. So that was the end of today's workshop. So I do just want to showcase that we do have a few more this semester. So our next one will be about how to talk to professors and how to approach them for a Mitacs Accelerate project. So today was about industry. Next time, in a couple of weeks, it'll be about how to talk to professors, because talking to profs is a little different. And then there'll be 2 sessions. So I'll be running the STEM session. My colleague Sarah will be running the session for humanities and social sciences. And then they'll be in Mac Hall in these rooms. So it's going to be during the undergrad research symposium. We'll also have another workshop about grant writing in December. So if you're ready to start writing, make sure, again, you have to have all the industry partner and prof first. But if you're ready to start writing, you can come learn about some tips about how to write the proposal, how do you fill out a good application, and then what are reviewers looking for, right? So how do you make sure you can try to be as successful as possible? And then on the other side of the spectrum, if you're trying to do something that's not with industry and you're interested in doing research abroad with another university, we also have one more workshop on December 7th for the Mitacs Global Link Research Award. Link at the bottom if you want to register. You can register for as many workshops as you like. So I did also want to just do a quick slide about other Mitacs training. So I do these types of workshops throughout the year, but there's other free training sessions available. So I don't facilitate these sessions, but if you're interested in things like project management or leadership or communication skills and developing it further, there are some self-paced training sessions online. Sometimes they also have facilitated sessions that you can also apply those skills. And so if you're interested, you can just register on the EDGE portal. So they are free if you're a student. So we're just going to do one more reflection activity. So I'm just going to open up the poll right now. Again, I just want to see, what did you learn today? Hopefully you did take something away from today's workshop. Hopefully you can utilize some of the resources, some of the email templates that I showed, and hopefully it might give you more responses from potential industry partners. So I'll just give you a few moments to just write a few things that you learned today. Okay, so I see some responses mostly regarding networking and follow-up. Yep, so those were 2 key areas that I covered today. All right, so just in case you are looking to contact me, best way to do it is through email. I showed this slide last week as well, but if you are writing an email to me, just make sure you have some relevant information in the subject line, but also, make sure you say your name, what year you're in, what program you're in. This example is for a grad student, but you can just change it for if you're doing a bachelor's degree. Preferably if you can tell me when you're about to graduate, just so I know how much time you have left. to be eligible. If you have a professor, that would be great to let me know if you have one. And then if you have a company or an organization interested, that would also be useful. I do recognize not everyone is at that stage yet, but if you just have, even if you have just basic questions, just make sure at least you tell me who you are and what program you're in, and then I can try to make sure to help you as best I can. When you don't tell me things like that and you just say, hi, how do I apply? It's really hard for me to try to figure out the best way to help you. And then as a note, if you are trying to contact more than one of us, make sure you're only writing it on one email chain so you can CC the other colleagues on the same email. Please don't do the thing where you're trying to write the same email 3 times. It's more work for you and it's also more work for us. So try to do it all just in one email chain, and then the right person, the relevant person, will get back to you. All right, so thank you so much for coming to this workshop. Again, this will be recorded, so in case you missed it or if you want to share it with your friends, feel free to share it and watch it again. So best way to reach me is through email. And then I also put my other colleagues' email just in case if you're on one of the other faculties or if you have more of a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary project, I just put their emails just in case. But if you want, you can just send it to me first and I can always just CC my other colleagues in my reply. Right, thank you so much for coming today. I hope to see you at my other workshops. So hopefully, again, this was helpful to you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.